Good afternoon. I am Taylor Grant, and this is my module design project. For my project, I decided to go with the module question, why do cichlids hold their young in their mouths? And to start off, we're actually going to look at what exactly is a cichlid, because there's a good chance that some people have never heard of these before. A cichlid is a freshwater fish from the family Cichlidae. They're typically found in Africa, Central and South America, as well as areas like Jordan, Sri Lanka, and Iran. There are at least 1,300 species worldwide. However, it's estimated that there is up to 1,600 and potentially even more. And because of this insane number of species, we're going to see an insane range in size. Typically, the sizes range anywhere from 2 inches to about 3 feet, which, once again, huge range. It's pretty insane how massive these guys can get, as well as how tiny they can be, just depending on what species they are. And then to give you some examples of cichlids that you may have seen or heard of before, I put some of the most popular cichlids to have in aquariums, as they are pretty popular aquarium fish. So if you've ever heard of them, that's probably why. At the top, we have one of the most popular. This is the tiger Oscar cichlid. They get up to about 18 inches, so they're pretty massive. They're very pretty and very popular aquarium fish. To the left, we have a strawberry peacock cichlid. They get about 6 inches. They're one of my personal favorites because they're really pretty. However, you're kind of less likely to see these guys. They're going to be a little bit more expensive and not as popular because they don't get quite as big. And at the bottom, we have my personal favorite. This is the blood parrot cichlid. They get about 10 inches, and they're really cute. They look like they're smiling all the time, and I love them very much. However, for today's project, we will mainly be focusing on cichlids found in Lake Malawi, as it contains over 600 species, many of which are mouth brooders. Now, Lake Malawi is located in Africa, and unfortunately, the tiger Oscar is a South African cichlid, so we will not be seeing much of them today. Here I have another image of a African cichlid, specifically a female of the species Buccochromis heterotanea, and she's pictured here mouth brooding with her fry. And if you don't know, fry is just another term for baby fish. You can kind of see the mouth brooding process looks a little odd. It does look like she's eating them, but I promise she's not. Now for our learning objectives, we will be looking at objectives for modules 5 and 6. For module 5, we will be explaining how sexual selection can result in the evolution of a trait. We will be generating proximate and ultimate hypotheses to explain behaviors or traits, and we will be defining altruism and describing at least one reason why we should be surprised to observe apparently altruistic behavior. Then for module 6, we will be discussing physiological compensation mechanisms or innovations that have allowed cichlids to mouth brood. So our first learning objective, once again, is how sexual selection can result in the evolution of a trait. We will start with a definition, and the definition of sexual selection is an advantage that certain individuals have over individuals of the same biological sex in respect to reproduction. This is obviously going to be within a singular species because you're not really going to have reproduction between different species. That kind of defeats the whole point. So in cichlids, we see sexual selection a lot with different males looking very like much prettier than the females, and in the specific species, totally forget how to pronounce it, and it looks really complicated, so I'm not gonna try for risk of embarrassing myself. But females in this species are more likely to mate with males that have elongated pelvic fins. You can actually see what these guys kind of look like up in the top right corner. All three of those pictured are males of the same species. Females are more of a dull blue color, and they do have the pelvic fins, but they're nowhere near as long. However, in this species, there was one specific study that found that no females mated with males having very short pelvic fins, meaning that if you belong to this species of cichlid, size unfortunately does matter. um, and since these males with elongated pelvic fins are going to have a lot more offspring than the males that don't, their gene is more likely to be passed on, which means that over time, elongated pelvic fins will become more common, meaning that over time, the species will have evolved to have longer fin males. And just as another example, you can see in the bottom corner, I do have a graph, and it shows the correlation between the pelvic fin length of a male and the proportion of eggs spawned. So you can see that males who have longer pelvic fins are more likely to have fertilized eggs, thus producing spawn with their genes. For our next learning objective, we will be generating proximate and ultimate hypotheses to explain behaviors or traits. Once again, we'll be starting with the definition. A proximate hypothesis is how a trait is produced, so the mechanisms or physical adaptations that allow it to happen. And an ultimate hypothesis is why a trait occurs in terms of its effect on fitness. Now, what does this have to do with mouth brooding? Well, a proximate hypothesis, once again, explains what mechanisms allow the cichlid to hold all of their fry in their mouths. And in a lot of species of cichlids, especially those found in Lake Malawi, female cichlids will actually have larger heads and wider jaws than male cichlids. Now, as I said, this doesn't occur in every single species, but it is really, really common. I do have an image of that here. This is actually from a study of the changes in anal fin spots when it comes to the different stages of reproduction. However, if you look at the far right, you can actually see that there is an image of a female mouth brooding, and you can kind of see that she has this little pouch attached to her jaw, which is actually allowing her to hold her young. Once again, an ultimate hypothesis explains why cichlids would hold their fry in their mouths, and this is really simple. Mouth brooding protects the fry from predators because it's pretty hard to get eaten when you're already in someone else's mouth. So unless the mother gets eaten, which is unlikely because these guys they are predatory fish, so they're usually somewhere towards the middle or top of the food chains. They're really not going to be eaten, so as long as their mother is alive, the fry don't really have anything to worry about. And then for our final learning objective of Module 5, we will be defining altruism and describing at least one reason why we should be surprised to observe this apparently altruistic behavior. The definition of altruism is a behavior that has a fitness cost to the actor and a fitness benefit to the recipient. And we see this in cichlids in the case of mouth brooding. But I would like to run over real quick exactly how mouth brooding works. So basically, cichlids will lay their eggs, and then the male will come over and fertilize them. And then after the eggs are fertilized, the mother will swallow the eggs and hold them in her mouth for the entirety of their incubation period. Then, once the cichlids have hatched, they exit the mother's mouth, but they will return if they feel threatened, or the mother will take them back into her mouth if she feels that they need to relocate, and other various reasons, but it's usually just for protection. And how is this altruism? Well, the fry are obviously the recipients here. They are benefiting because they are guaranteed protection as long as the mother is alive. However, as the actor, the mother is actually receiving a fitness cost, and that is that she cannot eat or breathe properly while she's mouth brooding. Obviously, when you're holding tens of babies in your mouth, you can't really eat anything without risking swallowing one of them. And you can't really breathe because, if you remember, fish have gills that are kind of connected to their mouths. And so when you have stuff in your mouth, you can't really breathe right. So this means that her only benefit is the passing on of her genes through the surviving young. And this is really surprising because, once again, this mother fish is essentially killing herself in order to protect her young. And in a lot of aquariums, there are cases where the mother cichlid will die while mouth brooding because she's actually starved. And then for our final learning objective, a little more lighthearted than the last one, is discussing the physiological compensation mechanisms or innovations that have allowed cichlids to mouth brood. So for our final definition, a physiological mechanism is the smaller physical and chemical events that help organs or other systems function. In cichlids, one of these mechanisms is actually females producing an oral mucus. This sounds really gross. I imagine it's as gross as it sounds. And once again, this only happens in specific species, but a lot of the research that I found on this did happen in Lake Malawi. This oral mucus, as gross as it sounds, is actually a really good thing. It protects them against pathogens and strengthens their antioxidants, which actually keeps the mother safe since as I said before, the mother is starving during a majority of this mouth breeding process, which weakens her immune system. So, this actually protects her from dying of disease. This also protects the young who are still developing their immune systems. It's similar to a human child, where when you're a baby, your immune system's still developing, you're pretty weak, you're still developing your resistances to things. It's the same in fish, and so having this extra protection against pathogens helps ensure their survival. And if you see on the left side, we do have Tiger Oscar returning. They do mouth brood as well. However, they do it a little bit differently than most of the cichlids in Lake Malawi, but I did want to bring them back just to show that they are also included in this process. And on the right, we have another example of an African cichlid, and if you look closely, you can see a cute little pair of eyes in her mouth. I promise it's a baby, she's not eating him. And here are my references. Thank you for listening.